Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Battle Styles, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using the code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are bringing back a section that I used to really do a lot on the channel, and that's top tier tweaks. The reason why we haven't done this in a long time is that we haven't had real life tournaments, and typically I would do my top tier tweaks either pre or post myself going to a really large event, and I'd be giving you my rundown of probably the best 5 decks performing wise of the metagame. So I'm going to try and weave this in. You know, we're still a long ways away until we get real life tournaments back, I think, for the most part. So yeah, I felt like we've just really got the first start in the Battle Styles meta. We're starting to see, you know, old favorites like Eternatus and Pikachu are still able to contend in the metagame and are getting some decent results. And purely based on those results so far, the highest point earners are these 5 decks in front of you: ADP, Eterna, Rapid Strike, Victini, and Pikachu in that order. So I'm going to give you my most recent lists for these and also talk about a couple of tech cards that I'm also trying to work in as the metagame develops and how I think they're going to be helpful. So we will start off in at the number 1 most point earning deck in online tournaments right now, and that is ADP Zacian. The list in front of you is pretty straightforward. ADP hasn't changed too much. I think Skylar was like the most recent innovation that I've seen with the list. And it allows you to cherry pick some cool cards, gives you an extra ouch to Rusted Sword when you need to go through an active Pokemon, which is nice. It becomes an extra Boss's Orders effect if you can use the Great Catcher. And it just cherry picks some nice stuff when you're trying to hit that combo turn 2 as well. It can be that, you know, E-Switch, that Saucer, that missing piece of the puzzle that you're after. So the Skylar is a bit of an all-star. Even though you only really want to play one copy of it, she can be quite strong in a number of different turns. So that's the biggest deal here. Marnie is still succeeding quite a lot in ADP Zacian. So I like having both in here. I haven't seen many decks play as many supporters as I do, and I understand that you're trying to reduce your game plan down to the smallest number of turns possible, so you can't possibly use all of these supporters per game. But that's not the point. You just want to have the Marnies in, you know, your fire matchups mostly, and other matchups where you need to disrupt. You want to have access to Skylar for that cherry picking, either in the early game or late on. And you want to just have the deep dives with research, and of course you want to be bossing as soon as everything else is in place. So I still really like that high support account. It makes you less vulnerable to just early power plant, and I think playing more supporters rather than playing a higher swell count is a better choice for you just for consistency reasons. So that's where we're at right now. I'm playing double Mawile rather than Aegis/V. I feel like Mawile is just overall very, very strong against Eternatus, which is still certainly around. You can always Captivating Wink a ton of different matchups and just randomly catch things, which is obviously good for you. It is cheesy, no one likes to play against it, but it's a card that you can use, and it is super effective in this deck for disruption. And effectively just your best attacker against Eternatus because it costs 1 less than your Zacian V. So still really worth teching for that matchup. Not much else to be said here. Escape Rope is a new card, obviously, from Battle Stars that you can take advantage of. You push their one big guy out the way, and you can hopefully mop up prizes elsewhere. Still playing that one switch because you are still playing Skylar, so you can cherry pick the right one at the right occasion, but I think Rope outweighs the strengths of the regular switch overall. The tech cards that I have had in the list and I'm trying to work around right now is Oricorio GX. I think Oricorio is very strong against the likes of Victini and the likes of Eternatus. Essentially, these are the decks that are most aggressive at knocking you out before you're able to get your ultimate ray off most of the time. The Pikachu Zekrom can try and stop you doing that as well, just by paralyzing. But you could just increase your switch count or you'll add in that 4th rope if you want to have a better time in that regard. But I think Oricorio makes more sense to me because you already play a really high Cherish Ball count. And it's just very good for when you GX, get knocked out, you get those additional 3 cards to get you into more sources, get you into more Boss's Orders, so you're keeping up in that race. I think it's really important, especially against Eternatus, even though we are only playing 1 Swell, of course, so Oricorio is not always live, but typically they only play 2 stadiums themselves, so if you can establish Swell, then get the Oricorio value, it's going to sit on board for the 2 turns that you need it to be in play for, right? Getting you those additional cards and double Mawile will give you a very, very strong chance to win that game. And I think that's one of the Achilles heels of ADP right now. It's one of your more difficult matchups. And same thing for Victini. It's just because they can aggressively take that knockout on the ADP because they're playing a welding deck, of course, and you don't have an easy response to them a lot of the time unless you find your rusted sword. So you want to have those sources available to you to be able to boss and still attack. So that's really important. And they often use things like Heatran in the early turns against you as well, which is something that Mawile can mop up quite quickly. So that's always a good card to bear in mind. So yeah, I think Oricorio is the biggest card that I want to try and work into the deck. The other thing I've thought about is EXP share for a similar reason. The Oricorio is trying to help you dig, mostly so you can ignore stuff and just keep bossing and hit more sources. But the EXP share means you need to hit less sources, so you front load that attachment effectively just by sending ADP into the fray, letting him die, and then having an EXP share on a Zacian or a Mawile. It guarantees an energy back for you, which then can be E-switched around the board if you need it to be, or it can just be one extra sourcer in the deck, which I think, you probably only get one use out of the EXP share, but it's such a big use for just like a one card include. Even if you just play one copy, I think EXP share can be good against those highly aggressive decks that stop the Ultimate Ray in the first place. But yeah, ADP is still very strong. The game plan hasn't changed for a while. You have even more Gust than ever, so yeah, still very solid in the game. I don't see that changing too much. I don't see it moving below, the top 5 very soon at all. Next up, we have Eternatus. Eternatus has proved that with Weak Guard energy, it's able to at least be okay into Urshifu. I do think Urshifu VMAX is likely to adapt in its own right by playing either Fan of Waves or Giratina Scoop Up Net if they're the Jirachi-based build. But it's still making your opponent have these additional outs rather than just going like, lol, I hit you. And even when they do remove the Weak Guard energy, you still have 30 hit points remaining, unless they hit you in the early turns with that strafe. So, yeah, important to have the Weak Guards, even just for the early game pokes that they can give, to be honest. And the main thing that you gain from Battle Styles is Phoebe. Phoebe actually is worth it in the deck, it turns out, to actually have a much better time against the Luke Metal matchup, which was previously your main metagame counter. Now you can play one Phoebe, one Sinlin. You can get through up to 2 Zamazentas if you have to. Typically, one Zamazenta is all you need to go through because oftentimes they need the help of Intrepid Sword. They want to use Luke Metal against you as well to gain even more tankability. But just the fact that you have potentially 2 ways to just burst through a Zamazenta is huge for you. And at the same time, it does help, of course, the Decidueye matchup. Now, I'm not sure that 2 Phoebe is enough for you to win that matchup. When we're playing less sort of useful attacking Pokemon, like no Spiritombs, we're just playing Hooper, we're just playing Yveltal. Not sure these are enough, but you do have a decent amount of time in that sort of matchup, especially when you have Crushing Hammer slowing them down. Derail can certainly slow down things like Decidueye as well, because they are playing a lot of special energies on their turns. So you can have time to accumulate that Phoebe and recycle it as well. So that's really the biggest thing that you're seeing here. Power Plant is just a staple for Eterna at the moment. Very good at slowing down all sorts of people, all sorts of decks, I guess I should say. And obviously we're not affected by it at all, so you can freely play these and have no backlash. So yeah, the deck is pretty solid, pretty streamlined at this point. The main tech cards that I'm considering in Eternatus right now is Energy Spinner, just for even more outs to early game attachments, because I do find them really important. And with the amount of Crushing Hammer in the game, with mirror matches, with Pikarom, potentially ADP can play Crushing Hammer as well, and more people just adding in like Giratina Scoop Up Net and Fan of Waves and that sort of thing. You want to have more access to Power Accelerator, and Spinner is great for giving you that access against Crushing Hammer based decks. I think it is sometimes important to go second if your opponent is playing Crushing Hammer, so you can use that Power Accelerator. Definitely something to bear in mind, and Spinner is a great enabler for that. And just in general, it's a burnable energy card, essentially, because it's not... You can just fail the search and draw an extra card from Crobat when you need to, so it counts as a better basic energy once you already have the core of 6, which I think is kind of the low end. And then also Escape Rope. Rope is just a good card in general. You rarely worry about smacking into the active, but it can be really good against Jirachi-based decks. I think Urshifu right now and Victini right now are some really popular and important Jirachi-based engines in the game, and just pushing those to the back, making sure you can hit their Crobat, hit their Dedenne instead, can be good for prize mapping and just pressure. So really just hurting your opponent's board with Rope in the deck could also be a thing. I still think you probably want to have a higher switch count than you do Rope count, but maybe just 1 or 2 Ropes weaved in for additional switch outs again for yourself to Power Accelerator when you need to, but also just be that additional threat of just saying, I can be hitting stuff, especially with Pikarom being Bolton based again, and Pikarom coming back in a big way. Push that to the back, let you go through a 3-prizer instead would just be devastating for them. So, yeah, the Eterna could think about playing Rope in a small count, I think, which could be pretty good. Rapid Strike Urshifu is an interesting one. Of all the ways that it's been played, it turned out Jirachi is the real BFF right now. I'm not sure if this will continue throughout the entire format. I have looked at Urshifu's matchup spread, and seeing as though it's still not even that favored into Pikarom, it's actually a 60-40 matchup on paper right now, based on the statistics. And possibly moving back to an auxiliary-based build will give you a higher chance to actually beat the Pikarom and other stamp matchups, right? Because essentially the way that Pikarom beats you is just good old faithful stamp choo-choo stuff, right? And they have Mewtwo for some weakness if they can deal with the Jirachi, of course. But if you're able to have artillery develop to then Karina's focus your way out of stamps, to then find your switch outs for the paralysis and also find yourself that flow of energies so you're not always ruined by Crushing Hammer, then having to go fishing for those energies on future turns, and the potential to whiff is there. So I don't think that Jirachi is set in stone the best way. Right now, it seems to be the highest performing way to play the deck, so that's the list I'm showing you. But I can still see more experimentation with Rapid Strike. The card is so flexible and so strong that there will be continued experimentation with this deck, and it could be ironed out in so many different directions based on how the meta game ends up settling. Urshifu is that sort of moving piece the entire time, whereas Eternatus is basically set with its 60 now. Pikarom is always set with its 60 at this point. ADP is basically set with its 60. I feel like Urshi and Victini can be the ones that are sort of more maneuverable and malleable to the metagame and more reactive. The only real thing of note in this list is that we are playing that Dimension Breach Giratina to now remove weak guard energies from Eterna players, which has popped up. It can also just have extra usage into the Mirror Match, into Speed Lightning energy. So it's just a useful card right now for sure. That Giratina can certainly be helpful. Outside of that, very standard from some of the lists that we have seen topping events recently with the Jirachi build. And yeah, I'm not hating on the Jirachi build. I think it's very solid in general, but just saying that the deck can continue to change as it wants to sort of grow in the meta, because I still think it's quite a young deck compared to all the others right now. The few things that I've thought about tech-wise, Mew for potential mirror matches, because it is one of the most popular decks in most tournaments still. It's almost always just behind ADP in popularity, so it's worth teching for, even though it's, the third best performing deck right now. It's the second in popularity right now, so it's certainly worth being aware of that mirror match. And also Karate Belts, just to try and safeguard against Crushing Hammer, which is just rife right now with Pika and Eterna being two of the top decks. The potential for ADP to play Hammers, and even Victini can play things like Fan of Waves. So having your Karate Belt available is certainly a reasonable tool addition. Next up, we have Victini VMAX. It's an archetype that I've loved playing, and I still think it, again, is malleable and can make some nice changes as you go. I think the thing that's really frustrated me as of late is that there's been a lot of Victini lists playing just 4 Welder and no research. I think one of the best benefits of this deck is that you get to have turns where you don't need to weld, so you can use that research and deep digger into the deck, cycle lots of the stuff that you don't want in anymore, play lots of cards so you stamp proof yourself more inherently, and yeah, so I'm playing researchers. I think they're really, really good with Victini. What else is going on in here? Cramorant's in here to be a better finisher against Dedenne GX. That's one of the awkward things about Victini, surprisingly, is that you don't really have an easy way to deal with that. You have to double blaze through it if you want to one-shot the Dedenne otherwise, and obviously Cram is an easier route for that to be your finisher. With the Welder combo, of course. This also has the Mewtwo and Mew in here for type coverage against Rapid Strike Urshifu. Either they're putting the Jirachi GX into play for you to Cramorant and knock out, or you can do the early Cram into the Mewtwo plays. So there's a couple of nice synergistic plays you can try and make here, where you deal with their Jirachi GX one way or another, and then you're able to capitalize on your weakness and take a big one-hit KO on their VMAX if need be, just by copying Reshizard for the most part. So yeah, Mewtwo nice. Also can be, again, just a surprise burst play against Pikarom. I know it's not a surprise when it's open deckless online, but your opponent has to play completely differently when they're playing Pikarom, right? And also that 30 less hit points, them having to put down a Pikarom rather than a Mewtwo Mew, just because you have the threat, right, of just double bursts, double blaze GXing them for 400, I can't even count. They have to use their Pikarom, which is 1 less energy needed for you to energy burst through them, right? So there's a lot of reasons to want to have the Mewtwo in here for a deterrent for the Pikarom, or just a punisher for the Pikarom if they just start their Mewtwo, right? And also very good against Urshifu. So a couple big decks in the format, some nice things that you can scalp with a one-off Mewtwo in here. Outside of that, not too much else to say. Again, taking advantage of the Jirachi package. The main tech cards I'm thinking of for Victini right now is Zigzagoon. It means that your Cramorant is far more usable. You can then start targeting Crobat throughout the game. It also just has some nice damage modification with Flare Strike into Pikarom. Now that that's becoming, again, more and more of a thing, you want to have easier access at knocking out those Pikas. Especially, again, when there's Mewtwo, they're more incentivized to put the Pikarom down physically rather than just dump it and play Mewtwo instead. You have so many different calculations with Energy Burst. They can become helpful at random spots. And also things like even Steaming Stomp and Hot Burn. There's so much variety in attacks you have in this deck that the Zigzagoon becomes helpful in a ton of different reasons. So I can certainly see that being weaved in. And the other card that I was thinking of as a tech include was actually Ninetales V. Ninetales V is very strong into ADP because you can steal Ultimate Ray turn 1, which is much better than stealing Steaming Stomp because you also... It's like you hit your welder and then you welder yourself anyway. So you can aggressively attack that ADP and then fill your board with energies to have like backup Reshizard and backup Victini VMAX just like there, you know, which is really good. But it's also extremely good against Urshifu, of course, because they are oftentimes playing that Jirachi engine and you can hit them with Victini VMAX for 220 and then you can use Ninetales V to finish off the 3-prizer whilst also taking a 1-prize KO on their Jirachi or on their Mewtwo, something like that, or their Zigzagoon. And then you're a Cramorant away from game, essentially, is the idea. Or, yeah, just using Double Blaze or something like that. So, yeah, I feel like Ninetales V could have a place in this deck as you can copy Urshi. And that's just a really broken attack. You know, everyone's playing Urshifu because the attacks are broken, right? And Ninetales copying it is pretty cool. So Ninetales has kind of been on the fringes for a long time, but I do think it's a solid one-card include potentially in this deck. I haven't found the space for it just yet, but I do think there is reasons to want to play it. And then the last card, the last deck of the top 5 performers right now is Pikachu and Zekrom. The deck just manages to cling on still. Energy Disruption, obviously very good against Eternatus, good against ADP as well. And this has become more and more of the forefront of Pikarom as we've moved on. The Mewtwo helping your type coverage against Urshi, of course. They do play that Jirachi GX, but you can deal with it with Tandem Shock and stuff like that, and Boltund, of course. So you can, in the late game, get your value with Mewtwo, which is always really nice. This deck is playing Fan of Waves in addition to Yell Grunt and Crushings. Fan of Waves being a one-of, which is good in mirror matches. Good against Urshifu, because you really don't ever want them to be doing their spread stuff. Really awkward for you, because they can do the 150 into the 120 and then also put 120 on other stuff. So you really have to be careful about that. So the Crushings, the Fan, the Yells, keep them off that snipe turn, the Gmax Rapid Flow if you can. And the Fan of Waves now getting more value against Eternatus because people are very incentivized to play the Weak Guard energies right now. They basically have to, otherwise they completely take the sack to Urshi. So you get the extra heads flip, essentially, in your deck by playing that one copy of Fan of Waves. And that's actually a huge deal against Eterna. It's one of the best ways you choke them out of the game. It's just with attacking into them, making them keep committing to one Eternatus. You slowly knock it out, and then they have no energies in play. You buy that free turn for you to then, you know, capitalize in a prize race. So yeah, that's the only real addition to the deck that's been made from battle styles. You could always be thinking about ropes on your own end. The biggest things I'm thinking of is Tag Switch coming into the list. I know a good amount of high-performing decks do play Tag Switch, and also Big Charm. Big Charm's certainly reasonable against the Eterna matchup. It's also pretty good against Victini because you can keep Boltund out of range. So yeah, some big perks to playing Big Charm. I don't see much space. I think the spaces dedicated to as much energy disruption as possible makes more sense for me right now. But I do think, again, it's one of those things where the metagame isn't just sat in one place, it's constantly changing. So working in some of those tech cards, if you feel it's worthwhile, certainly could be a thing. So yeah, that is my 5 deck lists for the top 5 performers right now and top tier tweaks. Talking about some of the tech cards that I've got in the back of my mind for changing lists as they go. Let me know what you think are the top 5 decks. Do you agree with this? Do you think some things below right now will be moving upwards? Do Do you think these 5 will stay the top for now? Or what other decks are you playing to try and capitalize on these being the 5 most played and most respected decks in the game? I'll hear all your thoughts down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I will be trying to do deck lists of these throughout the week alongside Jack, I think. So you'll get to see these decks more in action throughout, so stay tuned, and yeah, see you tomorrow. Cheers.